All right.
Hi, I'm Sarah Abell. I'm a dietetics major here at Ball State University. I'm a freshman, and I'm interviewing Seth Plantenga over our class of Honor 199 and what we reviewed this course. So, my first question for you is what drew you into this course?
So to be honest, honors 199, me being a senior, it was one of the last classes I had left. I've taken six others honors classes. 199 just wasn't one that fit well into my schedule until this semester. So that's how I ended up in here. And when I took the class, I wasn't sure about the course content, but I knew of Dr. Bartlett, and I'd heard good things about him. So I picked that course, and I was really happy to hear what the course content was. So that's how I ended up here.
And then, what's your major?
I'm a finance major, and I minor in financial planning. So planning on being a financial planner when I get out.
So, how do you think that this course will relate to your job as a financial planner?
I think it relates to any job. I mean, I think there's definitely different jobs that will relate more or less, depending on where you're working, who you're working with. Um, but I think just getting the training in this class and just having the conversations makes me more aware of any prejudices that I may have, just implicit biases when I'd be working with a client, because not that I think that, but like there might be like a stigma that since I'm going to be dealing with people who usually are going to have a little bit more money, there might be a stigma when it comes to white people versus non-white people. So that's something that I think it will apply to, and just not bringing those prejudices into my place of work.
Mhm. Okay, and then I'm going to take the interview back to how you grew up. So, what was your hometown like in relation to this course and what we went over this year?
hmm Yeah, so where I grew up, Westfield, Indiana. That's a north side suburb of Indianapolis. And if you know anything about the Indianapolis area, you know that that north side is probably the richer suburban area compared to like the east side or west side or south side. Typically, it is much whiter than the other surrounding areas in Indianapolis. So I grew up in it was a pretty white area. There definitely was diversity in little bits and pieces here and there. Like, I don't really remember having like, I mean, obviously I was a kid, so I wouldn't have like known as much, but I don't really remember anything like where it was like explicitly like there was like a big prejudice against non-white people, but yeah, it was just very white, and I think just a lot of kids, we just weren't very aware of it. And then, not to maybe jump too ahead, I don't know what else you're going to ask, but I did go to high school in the heart of downtown. I transferred to a school. And that was a much different experience. I would say that I would have to estimate, and this is definitely not numbers, but I would have to estimate it was probably 60% white and around 40% black. There wasn't a whole lot of other minority groups. It was mostly black, but there were some, but it was about like 60-40, I would say, in general. So that was a very different experience. And that is where I kind of learned a lot more about like, race relations in the country.
Definitely a lot larger than my school. If I had to estimate, it would probably be about 97% white at my high
Yeah.
school. I didn't actually notice until I looked around and there was only about 12 probably
Yeah.
people at my school.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, when I look back at when I was in middle school, and that's where I would have went to high school in Westfield if I had stayed in the public system, um, that would have, yeah, it probably would have been very similar to yours. It's probably maybe a little bit more, maybe like 5%, but it was still very low numbers, and you can probably count the amount of people.
So considering what you said about your hometown and like the schools that you went to, did you ever think about race growing up?
I did a little bit, probably not, and it depends on what your definition is of growing up, since
Mhm.
we're in a context of, we're still very young. So uh, growing up, if you were to say to an adult, like when you were growing up, a lot of times they'll think of like high school and college, but for us, it's kind of more like a younger thing. When I was very young, I definitely didn't think about it all that much. Obviously, like I didn't think of anybody differently. I did have a little bit more interaction maybe than um, a standard kid, just because I was in basketball. And just to be completely honest, I mean, and it's kind of a stereotype, but it's also pretty true. I think there is more African Americans, Black people that play basketball. So I had a little bit, I mean, not a lot, but a little bit more awareness. Um, yeah, I wasn't really thinking about it a whole lot until I hit high school.
Have you experienced or witnessed any racism in your life? Like going off of what you just said, you hadn't experienced a lot, but if you did, can you explain that? Or like seen
Yeah.
racist act?
Um, right. I think the biggest times that, I would experience like racism was probably during or at least when I was aware. Um, I was on an AU basketball team, which if you don't know what that is and you're watching this, it's like basically summer ball, and we just travel around the country, around the Midwest mainly, and we just go play. And it's people from different high schools, and you can only have like 3 people from the same high school. So it was a very different group of people than I would normally play with. I was one of 2 white kids on the team, so it was 8 Black kids, 2 white kids, and that was a really good experience for me. I really enjoyed it because it really did like I got to experience some more like things that I hadn't. But I did notice, like we went to Kentucky a handful of times, and when you go to Kentucky, it's still majority Kentucky basketball teams, and from my experiences, at least, those Kentucky basketball teams were almost always like fully white. And I definitely noticed, whenever we would walk in the gym, there would be we'd get the looks, and I would also hear about later on the Black parents that would travel with us. They would get treated differently than like my mom was treated. Like, and my mom noticed it all the time too. They just there's not necessarily like a pinpoint example of like, oh, this incident happened, but there was just definitely more of like a sense of respect that might have been given to my mom or my parents that wasn't given to those Black parents. And if that respect was given, it was almost like you could tell it was like a fear type of thing. So it's just that's where I probably saw it the most. And I didn't really, I don't really feel like there was anything I really experienced in high school, like during school, where I really saw that, because it was it was pretty much the norm, that we were so diverse. But yeah, I think when I traveled with my basketball team, that was like the most pertinent time of my life where I would say I could experience that.
How do your identities, like your gender, class, religion, and your race, shape your experience personally?
Um, I think they shaped me a lot. It's pretty obvious. I'm a white male in America. I also am an active uh, Christian. So, there's a lot of stereotypes that come with that. Like, you know, how that a lot of Christians are like portrayed, but it's also like kind of accurate in some ways. Like, there is a very big population of Christians in our world that are very bigoted, very racist. Like they're stuck in this ideology of like republicanism is like almost more so than like the Bible or whatever. So, and I don't, and it's tough to say, like, I mean, obviously there's historical context, but it's tough to say why that's a thing now. I mean, obviously it's a systemic thing, but, you would think, if you like actually, and it's not supposed to be like, oh, if you agree or disagree, but if you read the contents of the Bible, it does not support what they're doing. So I think that has like really shaped the way that I think about things, because I've had a very different, if I hadn't had maybe that high school experience that I did, I don't know if I would think the same way I do because of just all the automatic privilege I'm given. I was born into a middle class family, which was low middle class for where I was at, but it's still definitely not poor. It was probably more regular middle class. It was just a very rich area. So, I mean, I grew up very fortunate. So I think that definitely shaped me a lot. And, and it definitely allowed me to not be as aware of it as I was, when I was young. So that's what I would say. And I think me trying to directly combat that has been a big thing in shaping like how I think about things. So.
I'm a Christian also, and I feel like the new like Republican norm for Christians is almost like its own religion, almost as if they're taking things from the Bible and twisting them to mean something else, to be racist. And
Right.
that's kind of what I got from what you were saying, because I feel the exact same way.
Yeah, for sure.
How have the events of 2020 shaped your perception of racism or anti-racism in the U.S.?
It's kind of like hard for me to say because like obviously I was definitely not in opposition to anything that was happening. As far as if we're strictly talking about just the activism over the summer, like the heavy activism that was happening, like the street like protests. But I wasn't really involved with it, so it's hard for me to say like I was very in support of it, but I wish I maybe should have done, I should have been a little bit more active, but I don't know, maybe I bought into the idea a little bit of like like I had like all these experiences, I can't like be part of the problem, so yeah, I think the way that it's like shaped the way I've thought is not that drastically from maybe where I was before, but I'm just glad that, um, I can feel like maybe more confident in like talking about it with other people since it became like a thing. And, I never really thought to talk about it a whole lot with like other people because like my friends, in high school, like it was probably like 50-50 just because of the high school. And, like it wasn't something we really talked about because it wasn't an issue between us. And we just had such a micro worldview in high school. And I think that's just kind of how, you can get sometimes. So, I don't think it shaped a whole lot. It just really made me consider about like, where should I be taking, what I have thought for a while, like people are really acting on this now, and I've been thinking about it, and I don't, and it was also hard because I didn't want to seem like, like the bandwagoner, but I don't think that's the point, it's like, what can I do in a year from now, that can help. Um, and even if that's just talking to people. So that's probably what I took away from it the most, as far as just protests. So,
Do you think Ball
hopefully that
State
makes
does a
sense.
good, that does make sense, yeah. Do you think Ball State does a good job creating a culture of belonging, and why?
um, I think yes and no. And I think, and the reason why I say no, I don't think it's necessarily um, anybody's like particular fault that I can think of. Um, I just noticed that there are a lot of spaces for minorities on campus, and I don't know how much, Sarah, you would be able to notice that, being in your first year and it being such a weird year.
Yeah.
But my last 3 years, uh, it was very apparent, that they had, you know, different like events and things, for um, non-white people, that were centered around, cultural diversity, or whatever terms we would be appropriate for that event. But I think the biggest thing is that the and this includes myself, but there's not much of an effort, at least from white students and what I've perceived, to really be supportive of that until maybe recently. Like the last 3 years, it was what it was. And I think that isn't a Ball State issue. I think it's just like a society issue of just, having like these unspoken, like segregated like communities. And I don't think that's Ball State's fault. I think they do okay. They do an okay job of, making that an opportunity. But at the end of the day, it's up to the students. And the one thing I will say though is I don't know how I do feel about Ball State creating an open environment as far as how they teach their staff and their faculty. I don't think they've done a bad job with their students and having, that be part of what they want. But the staff and faculty, I don't know. We've had, I don't know if you know about this, Sarah. You might though, because it kind of got some national media coverage. But we had an incident with a professor in the business school who called the cops on a black kid in his class. And I won't go into the specifics, but like I don't. That obviously was not, and it doesn't matter what race they are. You don't call the cops on a kid because they're, if they're not being, like super aggressive or like, violent or anything. And it was pretty obvious that race had a factor in it. Like, I don't think it was hard to see because I don't think there had been any other, reports of him doing anything like that to a white student. So, and I remember when that was happening, there were some white students that stood up and said, he's rude and, he doesn't like take anything from his students. But so, and Ball State, and their reaction was just kind of like, oh, we're going to train people on how to do it. I don't have the answer, but I don't know if that's the answer. Just trying. I don't know, what else you can do from an employer standpoint, but typically, I don't think is, like enough. I think for students, there has to be more input from instead of saying, "Oh, we had this incident, we'll train our faculty." When that whole situation was happening, he said what he was going to do, but he only met with like a couple of students, like maybe 2 or 3. And I don't know, I didn't think it was sufficient at the time. But at the same time, I don't have that answer, and it's tricky. So I think they've done an okay job. I don't think they've done a bad job, but I definitely think, like everything, there's definitely ways where they could be doing better.
Room for improvement.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned in this course that has changed your perspective the most?
That's a good question. I think maybe one of the things that has changed my perspective the most would be just that concept of intersectionality. It wasn't something I had thought about at all. I didn't even know the term. And I knew, like, if you're Black and a woman, you have 2 different things to deal with. But I don't know, I didn't really think about it being like much more of like a topic. So I think like that will like stay with me. And I think like listening to like making sure you're listening to everybody for every part of them. You know what I mean? Like, not just bringing somebody into the room because they're Black, but bringing them in because they have an entire identity of many, not just being a woman, not just being white, not just being a man, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that I think will stick with me, is like recognizing when you're engaging with like tokenism in a way.
What do you think it means to be anti-racist based on like what we've went over this semester?
I think to be anti-racist, you just have to, I think the main thing is caring. Not everybody has to be the hero, but I think caring, I think about, bringing up the conversation when it needs to be had and not shoving it to the side, being intent about like who like what you're saying and how that can be perceived by other people. I don't know, there's a lot of things with being anti-racist. Another thing is knowing what history surrounds you, what history surrounds your community, knowing yourself, knowing that community, and what you can do in your day-to-day life without, necessarily having to be that superhero that can make the world of difference. I think just knowing, how you've been raised, knowing why you've been raised that way, and what the people around you have been raised like is very important. So then you can you can understand people, break down those prejudices, and show that it's not about them being a certain type of way, or just like it is what it is. Like, no, everybody has a reason for being the way that they are, and how can we be accepting of that?
Mm. Where do you see yourself in 10 years, and will the information you learned in this course go, like, what will you do with the information you learned in this course?
I think it kind of goes back to what you asked me earlier about, what I'm going to be doing, as far as a job, and how I'm going to be working with, hopefully I'm not just working with white clients, but how I'm working with clients that aren't that are different than me in any type of way. I think also I kind of see myself, well, I got married in the summer. I've been with her for 6 years, and I'll be with her, is what I see, obviously. But we're probably going to be involved in church life, and how can I? And this is something that I've talked about with some of my church friends as well. Is how can we create that community that is not that is open to talking about race, that it doesn't become a taboo topic, and through that, how do we, once we get through that, talking about it, how do we get it to where it doesn't matter at all, and and some people would say that is like the goal. Some people would say it isn't the goal for it to not matter, because and it's definitely not. It's definitely easy for. But yeah, like that's how it should have been from the beginning. So we need to work on having it matter, and having it matter so much, that then it just doesn't even become an issue, because you respect, people in your community for the way that they are. So I see myself in 10 years, working, as far as like, what this class would entail. I would say that, like, in my church, and we're probably going to be finding a church somewhere, wherever we end up moving to exactly. And I want to be part of that, introducing that conversation, especially since, excuse me, especially since, the community, that just because of where I'm going to be working, because I kind of have a job lined up, it is pretty white heavy, and just other than like the very downtown areas of Indianapolis, Indiana, and Indianapolis in general is still pretty white. So how do we, as white people and white Christians, how do we tackle that issue, and how do we do it in a way that isn't gonna put all the burden on the non-white people, but how do we also listen to them? So.
Mm-hmm. And then this last question, it relates to the question I just asked you, but how can the information that you learned in this course benefit you in the long run, like past your career, into your entire life? How can you reflect on this course?
Yeah. I think this is one of the best examples of like, what a college course should be. It should be a class, that, obviously other than ones that are just like for your career and like skill based, but like, like those like extra classes that you're taking, your honors classes or your elective classes, if you're not in honors or whatever, it should be about those life skills, and really like honing in on like, what makes us all human, what are we all dealing with, how can we learn from that, how can we show how can we understand each other better? And I think, you know, just from having conversations about, you know, how we got to this point as far as race in America, and globally to a small extent, and within our communities, you know, just understanding and, you know, communication skills. And I think that is something, you know, that's going to last a lifetime. I definitely don't anticipate, especially with the pace that it's been moving at in America, I don't anticipate this being a non-problem by the time I'm, you know, assuming nothing bad happens to me. But, you know, by the time I'm ready to die naturally, I don't anticipate this being a non-issue anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's something, you know, it stays with you forever. And how you treat people. And I have a lot of hope that it's going to get better, in a good portion of communities in America, even ones that may have had, you know, that, you know, more of a racist undertone, you know, in their community or maybe in their family. I have hope for that, but it's definitely not going to die. Even, you know, it may die in terms of outward displays. It definitely does not die within hearts. So I think just like reflecting on the material and just the experiences we've had from the conversations that we've had, I think it's crucial, you know, for just living life afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all the questions I have for you. So thank you for your time, and I wish you
Yeah,
well
of
in the
course.
future.
Thank you.